Number one, so there's creating social space, a suite-like environment, a premium club-like environment, or even just, frankly, a bar destination environment.
We are here with Jim Renne, sports principal at ROSSETTI, who was the architect for the recent $100 million renovation here at the facility, finished prior to this NFL season. Jim, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, thanks.
I thought a tremendous place to start, the appropriate place to start would be with some context.
Yeah.
Can you lay the groundwork for what the pre-existing conditions were here at the facility prior to the renovation, and begin to get into the philosophical part of why you did what you did?
Sure. Well, let me kind of make 3 points. When this facility was designed, 15 years ago almost now, I think, or at least 13 years ago when it opened up, there was a huge, unique characteristic that was created here, and that was engaging and integrating a stadium with the city, right? So existing buildings were in fact made part of the facility. So back then it was a kind of a novel thing. It hadn't been done really to the authenticity in which it was done, achieved. But so that being a big move, it meant that the characteristic and the feel of the stadium also wanted to have that sense of connection with Detroit. So that was achieved really by incorporating buildings that were already here. Now, fast forward over time, we have 4 major league teams in this market, and over time you have a huge inventory of suites that I think Ford Field and the Lions had to continue to make sure they could be competitive and sell and market. So where we started off, you think about the 4 major league teams in the market. Then you start thinking about the Millennial Generation, and I use it a little bit loosely, but as you know, that the Millennial Generation has had a huge move to downtown Detroit. Also reflected in that are smaller corporations that have more millennial-minded employees that have certain preferences. And with that in mind, starting to think about how do you capture those people in a building that has really, by and large, hasn't changed a ton in terms of their premium offerings or experience. And then third, I think, is to think a little bit about the new Little Caesars Arena coming into town. So sure, one of the major league teams, but now you have Little Caesars coming into town, Detroit coming into town, the Pistons that is, and brand new facility. How does Ford Field and Lions compete for those people in this market with a new facility in town? So you get all that, and the Lions had enough foresight to realize that and think about how and what they needed to accomplish to do that. Now, I think I'm hope I'm accurate, but I think Detroit is, I think, in the 12th largest market in NFL. And I think one of the objectives, for them, say to us, was we want to make sure we also reflect that in our revenues. So again, keeping up both in the local market, but also relative to the league itself, wanting to make that kind of commitment to be at least 12th, if not better, in terms of the league. So what we also then realized was there are a lot of things that weren't working here at Ford Field. Time goes on, things don't work. You have some unsold inventory, and the competition, as I mentioned, was pretty stiff, and was going to get stiffer. So we needed to start to, work together with Ford Field and Lions to understand, what is it that really made sense for this market and that they need to compete in, and ultimately create something that actually felt, I think you might have heard earlier with Jared, felt Lions-centric, felt Detroit-centric, which we understand what that means. It's not just about creating something that looked like Detroit or looked like Lions, but there's some authenticity in the environment that you want your fans to experience. So we developed a strategy with them that was all about how do you then now address the new fans, and how do you address new companies that are coming into the market, and create then a distinction from from the other teams and what they're doing. Even with the brand new arena, we had an opportunity to create a distinction. And that was all going to be leveraged by not only the Lions brand, but also by the Detroit brand that we had started, 13, 14 years ago by coming downtown in the first place. So that's kind of the context in which we were, starting to develop this project, and the Lions were just amazing in terms of wanting to collaborate and be open to how to create, diversity, new types of products in this marketplace, in this building, and address some of the challenges that were already here to begin with.
With those changing demographics that you mentioned, I'm sure you observed some changing behavior trends, and that probably governed how you thought about laying out the space and flow and everything that comes into that part of the conversation. What specifically were those behavioral trends that you were observing, and how that translate to the final design?
Sure. Well, it's no secret. Everybody's starting to finally understand that generationally, the millennial-minded is much more social. The idea of traditional suites, while it always has its place, it doesn't quite address the preferences that the younger generations and smaller companies are looking for, right? So we wanted to start to look at, starting to minimize anything that was sort of a traditional suite, and take that inventory, reduce that inventory, and increase the inventory of more social experiences. So later on, you'll start to see what some of those places are that we created, but it was really directly to address that. So number one, so there's creating social space, either in a suite-like environment, a premium club-like environment, or even just frankly a bar destination environment. And then the other was to start to look at addressing, as an extension of what you're asking, sort of a little bit of I might call it kind of a failure of interest in the north side of the stadium. And the reason I point out the north side, there's a distinction. The south side is where the existing buildings are. There were some natural characteristics and character we were able to to leverage, and by and large, that was a place where a lot of people just really wanted to be. And most of the suite inventory is on the south side. And the north side just didn't have the appeal, the attention, and I think the Lions have struggled to make sure that was, continuing, and so a lot of the inventory that was failing, I think, was on the north side. So we had an opportunity to completely reimagine what the north side would be, an opportunity to be distinct from the south side, create a different and new destination that was diverse in its characteristics. So, between a club, a sort of a branded bar destination, social suites, and a little bit of a takeoff on the new, more traditional suite model that's been developed here on the south side. All that diversity, in addition to the social spaces and engagement that opportunities that were there, was a way of addressing, I think, your question.
What do you mean specifically by a social suite? Can you illustrate that for us?
Sure. So instead of being in a box, right, and you're mainly mixing and socializing with people within that suite, and in a traditional suite, has served its purpose for a long time, and many fans who have in a certain demographic still prefer that, and it allows us, say, a company to be able to mix and keep their customers within a certain contained area. But the reality is that, as you start to think about what the fans, even your customers are being invited, prefer an experience where you can kind of start to talk with other people in that area. So not just your own suite mates, but others that may be in that area. So what that really means is that it means sort of opening that up to being able to meet people in social areas or connected to a suite experience. We even looked at, working with the Lions is maybe the suite isn't really that large. Maybe it's sort of more a place where you can go. You have a space that's allocated for your use, but really all the excitement is like, getting up again. Watching a game these days are much more about moving around in reality, right? I mean, I think we're all seeing that in the industry. So provide an opportunity to move around, to again, engage with others, and obviously food and beverage is one of those key things that allow you to do that. So you go and you kind of go in a common area where you can eat and get your food, drink, and then you bump into other people and do your networking out there. And so that's one example of what I mean by a social space related to a premium experience.
How did you have to think about kitchen and pantry space with the reimagination of the food part of this?
Sure. So key, right? I mean, key is being able to provide the right service to those premium spaces where customers are. You're trying to deliver a high level of quality of food experience. So we had to address the kitchens. In fact, creating a new kitchen in some cases, augmenting others, adding additional sort of secondary pantries and so on, which were part of the strategy. It's an investment in infrastructure. So there's a cost that goes with that, but I think the Lions were completely dedicated to delivering a first-class experience and knew that was necessary to accommodate that. So then you had some other kind of unique things like our design team, along with the Lions, have developed ideas for pizza oven that's out in the open, looks pretty cool. It's much more active, and so the kitchen part and the cooking part then became more exhibition style in some places than you would in the traditional club setting.
Well, Jim, why don't we leave it there for now?
Great.
Please stay tuned. Click ahead for our venue tour of Ford Field.